I should have never returned to my hometown of Blackfern, but grief makes people do strange things, and after my mother died, I found myself walking back into the one place I swore I'd never see again. The Ashridge house, an old property tucked behind fields of dead wheat and a forest so unnaturally silent it felt as though the world held its breath around it. I was the one telling this story, the only voice left to recall what happened, and even now, as I speak, I feel that familiar pressure in the back of my skull, like something old and heavy is trying to keep me quiet. But I have to speak it. I have to let someone know. The house belonged to my family for generations, though no one stayed long. Every few decades the property was abandoned again, left for the weather to swallow and for the forest to reclaim, only for another Cole to inherit it and repeat the cycle. I had not seen it since I was 9, not since the night my older brother Ethan vanished without a sound. No body, no signs of struggle. He simply walked into the woods behind the property and never came back. The police searched for weeks, and the town whispered that the house had taken him, the way it had taken others long before us. My mother never recovered, and neither did I. The silence of the woods, the way the house seemed to watch us, the strange old well on the far side of the property, it all lived in my nightmares. And yet, when she died, she left the house to me in her will, along with a letter I still cannot read without trembling. She wrote, "Do not go near the well. Do not answer if it speaks." As a child, I thought she just feared superstition, but now I know she was terrified of something real, something I would soon discover myself. When I first stepped inside the house after 20 years, the air smelled like rot and wet stone. Dust blanketed everything. My footsteps echoed even though the house should have been insulated. Every window was sealed shut, nailed and bolted as though someone feared what might come in, or go out. I unpacked only the essentials and told myself I'd clean the house in the morning, but sleep felt impossible the moment I stepped into the old bedroom my brother and I once shared. The walls still bore the faint scratches we carved as children into the peeling wallpaper, but the room felt colder than the rest of the house, as though the floorboards hid ice beneath them. I tried to sleep anyway. Hours passed. The house creaked, not with the settling of old wood, but with the rhythmic shift of something moving inside the walls, something slow and deliberate. I told myself it was rats until I heard the whisper, soft, frail, unmistakably human, "Adrian, my name," spoken exactly the way Ethan used to say it. My blood froze. I sat up in bed, listening, holding my breath. The whisper came again, but from beneath the floorboards this time, crawling up through the cracks. "Adrian, help me." I didn't sleep at all that night, and when the dawn came, I found myself standing in front of the house's back window, staring at the tree line where the woods waited dark and patient, and beyond them, the stone ring of the old well, half buried, untouched for decades. I could almost hear my mother's voice. "Do not answer if it speaks." But something had already spoken, and it had used my brother's voice. By the following evening, after a full day of telling myself I had imagined the whispers, I decided I needed to confront the source of my fear, the well, and put the past to rest. Memories of Ethan always led me there. He had been obsessed with that ancient stone ring even before he disappeared, claiming he heard voices at the bottom, voices that didn't like being alone. We had thought he was pretending, trying to scare me like older brothers do, until the night he vanished. The path to the well looked the same as it did in my childhood. Crooked trees leaning inward like ribs, the ground soft as if something breathed beneath the soil, the air unnaturally cold despite the warm season. As I approached, I realized how enormous the well truly was. As a child it felt big, but now it seemed impossibly deep and wide, made from stones too old to have been carved by any settler. Moss coated the sides. Thick roots wrapped themselves around the stones like claws. A rusted iron cover had been placed over the opening at some point, but it was half pulled aside, as though someone, or something, had climbed out. I tried to convince myself it was weather damage, but the grooves along the stone were too sharp, too fresh, too much like fingers. I leaned over the rim and peered into the darkness. No bottom. Only blackness. Only silence. And then, faintly, as though traveling from miles beneath the earth, I heard it again. My brother's voice, broken and desperate. "Adrian, please, it hurts." My knees nearly buckled. The sound wasn't like memory. It wasn't like imagination. It was real, echoing up the shaft. I whispered back before I could stop myself, "Ethan? Ethan, where are you?" Instantly the woods changed. Every tree went still. Every bird, every insect, every breeze ceased. It was as if the world was petrified in place. The well responded, but the voice was wrong. It was Ethan's voice layered with others, dozens of others, whispering behind him in perfect unison. "I am here, beneath the quiet, beneath the mouth that opens." My pulse thundered in my ears. Something was moving below, something large enough to shake the earth in slow, dragging motions. The shadows inside the well shifted. For a moment, I thought I saw pale fingers reaching upward. I stumbled back just as a gust of icy air burst from the opening, slapping my face like frozen breath. I shouldn't have stayed, but grief and guilt and fear twisted inside me until they stole my judgment. "What happened to you?" I called out. The voice came back immediately, too immediately, as if it had been waiting right behind my words. Fell into the dark? Let me show you. Let me show you." The air around the well vibrated, low and humming, like something deep below was singing. And then the whisper changed. "Do you remember the night I disappeared?" My breath hitched. "Yes." "Do you remember how you didn't follow me?" I froze. Those were Ethan's exact last words, but warped, like they had been taken apart and stitched back together wrong. "I didn't follow you because I was scared," I whispered. "I know," the voice said, and now it wasn't Ethan at all. It wasn't even human. The sound scraped, rattled, dragged like bones along stone. "You should still be scared." I turned and ran, stumbling through the underbrush until the house came into view again. But the woods no longer sounded silent. Behind me, the trees groaned, the branches creaking like 1,000 mouths chewing. By the time I slammed the back door shut, something was already moving through the forest, dragging itself slowly, patiently, toward Ashridge House. And that night, as I lay awake in the dark, the whispering returned. Not from the well, not from beneath the floorboards, but from inside my room, inches from my ear. "You should have followed him." I woke the next morning to find footprints in the hallway. Muddy, watery footprints leading from the back door straight to my bedroom, each one shaped like a human foot but unnaturally long, the toes stretched like fingers curling forward as though gripping the floor. The prints stopped right outside my bedroom door, as if whatever made them had stood there, watching me sleep. I tried to leave the house to drive back to town, but the moment I stepped outside, the world seemed wrong. The forest had crept closer, swallowing yards of open land overnight. Trees that once stood far back were now only a few meters from the porch, twisted and leaning, almost forming a ring around Ashridge House. I heard whispering coming from the branches, not voices this time, but something like breathing, as though the wind itself was alive and hungry. Desperate for clarity, I went to the basement, hoping to find old records or journals that might explain the well or my family's connection to it. What I found instead was a carved stone door hidden behind a rotten shelf, its surface etched with symbols that spiraled inward like the patterns of a seashell. The door had no hinges, no handle, yet it pulsed faintly as if something behind it was breathing in slow, heavy rhythms. I touched the stone, and every symbol flashed cold beneath my fingers. A whisper slid through the basement. "You opened it once before." My heart hammered violently. I had no memory of ever opening anything like this, not as a child, not ever. But the whisper persisted, curling through the shadows. "He went in, you stayed out." Suddenly, the memory slammed into me, fragmented, buried for decades. Ethan and I in the basement, years ago, hearing a faint tapping behind the stone door. Ethan saying he heard singing. Ethan pulling at the corners of the stone as though compelled, as though something behind it whispered to him alone. and me running upstairs, leaving him behind when the tapping turned into scratching, and the scratching into something like hands beating against the stone. He had lied about going into the woods. He never made it to the forest at all. He disappeared here, into whatever waited behind that door. As the memory ended, the stone pulsed again, harder, the symbols glowing faintly like veins carrying some sort of sickly light. I backed away, but the basement felt smaller, the air thicker. Something shifted in the shadows behind the furnace, long and slow, dragging itself along the ground. A shape that wasn't human, but wore something human over its frame like clothing stretched across the wrong body. Its face was covered in darkness, but its hands, too many fingers, far too many, gripped the stone floor and pulled its swollen body forward. It whispered with Ethan's voice and with the voices of others layered beneath, "Come see the quiet place." I bolted up the stairs as the thing lunged, slamming the basement door shut just as something massive crashed into it from the other side. The entire house shook. Wood cracked. The door bulged inward. I blocked it with a dresser, shaking uncontrollably. And then, silence. A silence so absolute it swallowed every sound, even my own breathing. For several minutes, nothing moved. Then, from the other side of the door, the thing spoke in a calm, quiet whisper. "We are so close now." I knew then that the house wasn't keeping things out. It was keeping things in. And I was now trapped with them. By the final night, I understood that survival meant confronting whatever lived beneath the house and the well, and that running was impossible. The forest had closed around Ashridge House fully now, trees twisting together like ribs of a living creature. I could feel the ground pulsing beneath my feet as though heartbeats throbbed far underground. So I returned to the basement door, the stone warm now beneath my hand, the symbols glowing brighter as if aware of my presence. When I pressed my palm to the center spiral, the stone softened like flesh, and with a sick crack, it opened inward, releasing a rush of cold, damp air that carried the scent of earth long sealed away. A stairway descended into darkness. But I heard Ethan's voice, faint, childlike, calling my name just as he used to when scared. "Adrian, please!" That was enough to force me downward. The walls breathed around me, the ceiling dripping with thick moisture, as though I walked deeper into the throat of something alive. The stairs opened into a cavern lit by bioluminescent veins in the stone, and in the center of the cavern was a massive pit. Another well, an older well, the true well, the one outside merely a mouthpiece. Around the rim stood figures, dozens, thin as sticks, their bodies pale and hairless, their faces stretched blank except for wide, circular mouths that opened and closed silently, as though silently gasping in endless hunger. Their heads turned toward me in perfect unison at the slightest sound of my breath. And in the center of the pit, clinging to the wall with elongated limbs, was Ethan, or what had once been Ethan. His body twisted thin like wire, his eyes black hollows, his jaw hanging open as though unhinged. When he saw me, he whispered my name, but his mouth did not move. The sound came from the air itself, vibrating through the cavern. "Adrian, you left me," he whispered. "You let me fall." I choked, stepping forward, tears burning my eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was a kid, I was scared." The cavern shook as something immense stirred far below the pit. A low moan rose from the depths, ancient, starved, reaching upward. The pale figures leaned toward me, mouths widening in anticipation. Ethan's body crawled along the wall, closer, his limbs bending at impossible angles. "It wants you," he whispered. "It took me because it wanted you. It kept me alive to bring you back." The realization hit like a knife. Whatever lived beneath this place did not consume its victims. It changed them, hollowed them, turned them into vessels, into messengers, into lures. I stepped backward, but the pale figures closed in, their mouths opening wider, a faint ringing sound rising from their throats. Ethan lunged toward me, his arms stretching unnaturally long. "Don't run this time," he whispered. "Follow me." The ground trembled violently, cracks splitting beneath my feet. Something massive began climbing the pit's walls. Too many limbs, too many eyes, its skin the same stone-veined texture as the cavern itself. I turned and ran, sprinting up the stairs as the cavern deafened with a chorus of screams and whispers. The stone door began closing as soon as I crossed the threshold, and I shoved my shoulder through the narrowing gap, pulling myself up just as a hand, Ethan's hand, reached through, brushing my leg with cold, brittle fingers. "You can't escape," he whispered as the door sealed shut, smoother than before, no visible crack. The house roared around me as something huge struck the basement from below, shaking the entire structure. I fled up the stairs and out the front door into the smothering trees, forcing my way through branches that clawed at my skin. Somehow, impossibly, I made it through, stumbling out of the woods at dawn, collapsing onto the road. When I glanced back, the trees had already swallowed the house completely. Ashridge House no longer existed. I moved far away after that, far from Blackfern, far from any forest. But even now, at night, when the world goes quiet, I hear it, the faint whisper rising from nowhere, "Follow me!" And sometimes, when I look into mirrors or puddles or windows after dark, I see the well behind me, waiting, its silent mouths opening wider.